This segment of the Chopin podcast is brought to you by the Chopin Foundation of the United States, dedicated to promoting young American pianists and making Chopin's music accessible to all. Despite being stylistic outliers amid the flourishing of the Romantic piano concerto in the 19th century, Chopin's two concertos have always been popular among pianists and recorded countless times. Luckily, we have Jed Distler here to recommend some of the most outstanding recordings of Chopin's concertos made over the past century. Jed has listened to untold thousands of piano recordings in his life and written about many of them for Gramophone Magazine and ClassicsToday.com. He is the host of WWFM's weekly radio show Between the Keys, and in 2021, he was the official Gramophone blogger of the International Chopin Competition in Warsaw. At the end of each episode of the Chopin podcast, Jed will share his thoughts on an exceptional recorded cycle of the given genre, as well as a memorable recording of an individual piece within that genre. Since Chopin only composed two concertos, Jed will forego the usual cycle recommendation and instead offer a pair of remarkable recordings for each concerto. Here are his picks.
It's safe to say that most people who are interested in buying a recording or downloading a recording of the two Chopin concertos are much more interested in who the pianist is rather than who the conductor is. But you really have to have a good conductor to bring out the beauties in the accompaniment. And I think that Stanislav Skrowaczewski does this in his recording on the Classics label with the Saarbrücken Radio Symphony Orchestra. The piano soloist in his recordings is Eva Kupiec. She's a wonderful pianist, but if you really want to have the synergy between piano soloist and conductor, get these recordings. Now let's talk about the Chopin concertos with just an emphasis on the pianist. The recording that Maurizio Pollini made of the E minor concerto right after he won the 1960 Chopin competition has always been in the catalog, and you can see why, because this is a very aristocratic and mature conception of the piece with rippling passage work, beautiful harmonic awareness, and the most gorgeous tone. And actually, in this recording, the accompaniment is very distinguished. It's with the Philharmonia Orchestra under Paul Kletzky, who was a fantastic conductor. And it's very well recorded, and there's really no surprise that this has been a reference for more than 64 years. Now, for the second concerto in F minor, Joseph Hofmann's performance is preserved in an air check with the New York Philharmonic with John Barbaroli conducting. And in this performance, you can tell that nobody cared about the accompaniment because the opening ritornello is cut to shreds, as it usually was in those days. And it was on many commercial recordings. Arthur Rubinstein's first two recordings of both Chopin concertos have abridged ritornellos. But what is so wonderful about Hofmann is the incredible control and the passage work, how these very fast runs he takes at such a clip in tempo, yet never sounding rushed. He's a pianist that Harold Schoenberg rightly said made almost all of his contemporaries sound thick. And if you listen to what he does in the slow movement, of course, he adds octaves and places, and he has his little tricks here and there, but who cares? It's just so wonderful to listen to. And also the little cadenza of descending chords that most pianists kind of rush through. He takes his sweet time over that. Bum, 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 bum. Perhaps he plays it a little slower than I do. And in fact, I heard Emanuel Ax do the same thing when he played this concerto in concert. And I went backstage. I said, Manny, did you just channel Joseph Hofmann? He just smiled at me. I should also mention a really interesting recording of the Chopin F minor concerto with Clara Haskil, who just plays at the top of her form. And she's supported by Igor Markevich, who is a great composer and one of the greatest 20th century conductors, and the Lamoureux Symphony Orchestra. It's a wonderful recording, and what was not advertised, but what is clearly audible, is that Markevich uses Alfred Cortot's re-orchestration of this concerto, which adds a lot of little bells and whistles and interesting textures. And I don't think it adds all that much to Chopin's original, but it is very interesting to hear this. And it just stands alone as a very distinctive recording.
Thanks for listening to the Chopin Podcast. If you like what I do, consider supporting my Patreon, where members get a discount on the new line of Chopin Podcast merch. And members also gain access to countless hours of exclusive content from guest interviews across the 16-part series. For this episode, that includes bonus scenes from my interviews with Garrick Ohlsson and Martín García. The next and final episode of the Chopin Podcast is a kind of variety show, featuring segments exploring some of Chopin's gems that fall outside the genre categories he's most known for. As always, Garrick Ohlsson will kick off the show analyzing one of Chopin's often forgotten genres, the rondos. And Jed Distler will offer his recording recommendations for a whole suite of singular and lesser-known works by Chopin. We'll also be joined by 3 special guests making their first Chopin podcast appearance. Bronze medalist of the 2015 International Chopin Competition, Kate Liu, will react to her now famous performance of the Andante Spianato and Grand Polonaise from Warsaw. Grammy Award-winning pianist Emanuel Ax drops in to discuss Chopin's chamber music composed in both the earliest and latest periods of his musical life. And we'll finish with the spokesperson of the Chopin Institute in Warsaw, Alek Laskowski, in a wide-ranging interview that includes the story of the origins of the International Chopin Competition a century ago. Stay tuned.